Welcome back to the deep dive. We toss around the word genius pretty casually these days. You figure out a clever way to organize your inbox, or you hack your way through a video game, and suddenly you're a productivity genius.
Right. Yeah, the bar has definitely been lowered a significant amount over the last few centuries.
Just a bit. But today, looking at the massive stack of research you've pulled together, I really feel like we need to retire that word for normal people.
Yeah.
We are diving into the life of a figure who basically defines the concept of a polymath.
Absolutely. And it is a massive topic, honestly. It's a little intimidating to even talk about.
I can imagine. Because you know people who are good at multitasking. Just wait until we get into this guy. We were talking about Avicenna, or as he is known in the Persian and Islamic world, Ibn Sina.
When you look at the scope of what this man accomplished in medicine, in philosophy, astronomy, logic, it's really difficult to wrap your head around the fact that this was all done by one single person. We are talking about someone who, over 1,000 years ago, essentially built the operating system that Western and Eastern medicine ran on for centuries.
Exactly. And just to give everyone a roadmap of where we're going today, we have pulled together a really comprehensive biographical account of his life. We're going to trace his journey from his origins in the Samanid Empire all the way to his lasting impact on how we understand the human body and the universe.
And the mission here isn't just to recite dates. Dates are fine, but they really don't tell the story. The mission of this deep dive is to understand the mechanism of his mind.
The mechanism. I like that.
Right, because we want to look at how one person can absorb knowledge from literally everywhere, from the most exclusive royal libraries to a casual conversation with a local grocer, and then synthesize that into works that defined human learning for a millennium.
That's the part that really got me during the prep. The grocer, we're definitely going to unpack that because it completely changes how you view smart people. But first, we need to set the scene. We are dropping right into the Islamic Golden Age.
Yes, exactly. We are in the Persian world, which is modern-day Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Iran. And we are in the late 10th century.
So what does that world actually look like?
Context is everything here. While much of Europe was in what we often call the Dark Ages, though historians, they argue about that term a lot, the intellectual output there was certainly lower. But the Samanid Empire and the broader Islamic world were thriving.
Thriving is almost an understatement, right?
Oh, absolutely. You had these massive exchanges of culture, science, and philosophy. Cities like Bukhara weren't just trade hubs along a route, they were library cities. Intellectualism was the highest form of currency.
So into this vibrant intellectual pressure cooker, our protagonist is born. Let's get into the origins of this prodigy. Who is he and where does he come from?
So Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, was born on August 22nd in the year 980. He was born in a place called Afshana, which was a small village in the Samanid Empire, very near to the metropolis of Bukhara.
And looking at his family background, he didn't exactly start from zero. His dad was a pretty serious guy.
No, not at all. His father, Abdullah, was a respected scholar originally from Balkh in what is now Afghanistan. He was a government official, the governor of a village, but more importantly, he was an Ismaili.
Let's pause on that for a second. Ismaili. Why does that specific detail matter for his upbringing? What does that mean for a kid growing up in that house?
It matters heavily because the Ismaili tradition places a massive emphasis on the intellect. They focused on the search for hidden truths and on deep philosophy. They were known for these very intense esoteric debates.
So it wasn't just casual dinner table talk?
Not at all. Avicenna grew up in a household where rigorous learning was the baseline currency. It was valued above pretty much everything else. He didn't grow up talking about the weather. He grew up listening to heavy theological and philosophical arguments right in his living room.
So he's swimming in this stuff from day one. And that value system clearly took hold early. Because looking at the source material here, the timeline of his childhood achievements is, frankly, it's ridiculous. It makes you feel a little bit bad about your own childhood.
It is incredibly humbling, to say the least.
The source notes that by the age of 10 years old, he had memorized the complete Quran. Now, for those who aren't familiar, that is not a small book. That is a massive, massive feat of memory.
It is. And we really need to clarify what memorization actually means in that historical context. It's not just rote memorization, like learning the lyrics to a pop song so you can sing along.
Right. It's much deeper than that.
Exactly. In that tradition, memorizing the text is the foundational bedrock for understanding language, rhythm, ethics, and law. It literally sets the structure for how your brain processes complex information.
So he's essentially downloading the entire database of his civilization's language and values directly into his hard drive at 10.
That's a great way to put it. If you have that kind of robust database in your head by age 10, your capacity for connecting complex ideas is already being stretched far beyond a normal adult's. You have the raw data. Now you just need the processing power.
And he clearly had the processing power to spare. Because by age 14, the sources say he had already surpassed his teacher in elementary logic.
This is a pivotal moment in his biography. The teacher's name was Natili. Imagine the dynamic there for a second. You have a master, someone who has dedicated their entire life to teaching logic, Aristotelian logic, how to construct a valid argument, and here comes this 14-year-old student who isn't just keeping up.
He's running circles around him.
He is completely dismantling him. There are anecdotes where Avicenna would point out flaws in the logical structures that the teacher hadn't even noticed himself. He wasn't just learning what to think, he was mastering how to think.
That's incredible.
He understood the underlying architecture of the argument better than the guy who was paid to teach it to him.
It's like the student becoming the master, but before he's even old enough to shave.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about the way his mind actually worked?
It tells us he had a profound, intuitive grasp of systems. He could see the structural flaws in an argument instantly. It suggests a velocity of learning that is almost frightening. And honestly, it probably made him a little difficult to be around.
I can imagine just some teenager going, actually, teacher, your premise is fundamentally flawed.
Right. At 14. It's intimidating.
Velocity of learning. I really like that phrase. And that brings us perfectly into our next section, because this velocity didn't just apply to formal sit-down schooling. This is one of my favorite parts of the research. He really didn't care where the information came from.
This is the concept that knowledge has no hierarchy. Usually in academia, even back then, and maybe especially back then, there's a certain snobbery. You learn from the professor, the sheikh, the master. You don't learn from the help.
But Avicenna did. The source specifically mentions he learned Indian arithmetic from an Indian grocer.
It's such a beautiful historical detail. Let's unpack Indian arithmetic for a moment. At this time, people were often still using very cumbersome methods for calculation, sometimes even finger counting systems or older Roman-style concepts. But Indian arithmetic refers specifically to the Hindu-Arabic numeral system.
The one we all use today.
Exactly. The digits 1 through 9, and crucially, the concept of zero, place value. This was absolute cutting-edge technology at the time. It allowed for complex calculations that were simply impossible or incredibly slow with other prevailing methods. And he didn't find this in a prestigious lecture hall. He found it in the local market.
Imagine him standing there, maybe buying some fruit or vegetables, and noticing how the grocer is calculating total on a slate or with a stylus. And instead of just paying and leaving, he's like, wait a minute, what is that algorithm you're using? Teach me that right now.
Precisely. It shows a complete lack of intellectual vanity. He didn't care about the social status of the teacher. He only cared about the validity and utility of the knowledge. He recognized a superior mathematical system when he saw it, even if it was being used to count melons.
He was a sponge.
Yeah.
But a highly discerning sponge.
A discerning sponge, yes. The source also mentions he enhanced this knowledge later with a wandering scholar. Again, not a tenured professor with a fancy robe, but someone just moving through the world. He treated everyone as a potential source of high-level data.
So he's got the logic down, he's got the theology, he's got the advanced math from the grocery store. He also studied formal Islamic jurisprudence under Hanafi scholars, so he definitely did the traditional route too.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway here is that he absorbed knowledge everywhere he went.
That radical openness is what allowed him to synthesize things that other people kept strictly separate. He didn't see the artificial boundaries between street knowledge and book knowledge. It was all just data to be processed.
So he's built this massive intellectual toolkit. But then at age 16, he takes a hard left turn. This brings us to the medical turning point.
Yes. Age 16. Most kids that age are just trying to figure out who they are, maybe causing a little trouble. Avicenna decides to focus his entire massive intellect purely on medicine.
And the source makes a very specific, fascinating distinction here. He didn't just learn medicine. It explicitly says he discovered new methods of treatment. So he's learning the field and rewriting it simultaneously.
That really becomes the pattern of his life, doesn't it? He enters a field, absorbs everything that is currently known, reading Galen, Hippocrates, the previous Islamic scholars, and then he immediately sees the gaps and fills them. He treats the medical field as a complex puzzle to be solved, not just a static scripture to be memorized.
But this medical pivot leads to the catalyst event that basically launches his entire career on the world stage, the story of the Sultan of Bukhara.
Ibn Mansur. This whole sequence feels like a scene from a movie. You have the Sultan, the absolute most powerful man in the region, suffering from an unknown but dangerous ailment.
And the stakes couldn't possibly be higher.
Exactly. If the Sultan dies, the empire might crumble. Chaos ensues. Civil war is a real possibility. And the trained court physicians, the absolute experts with all the titles and the graybeards are completely baffled. They are paralyzed. They cannot figure it out.
Enter the 16-year-old kid.
Enter Avicenna. Someone must have whispered to the court, there is a prodigy in Afghana you should call. So he is brought in, he examines the Sultan, and he cures him.
Do we actually know what the illness was from the source text?
The sources are somewhat vague on the specific pathology, which was common at the time, but the outcome is historical fact. He succeeded where the entire medical establishment of an empire had failed.
That is the ultimate drop the mic moment. But here is where it gets really, really interesting to me. The reward. The Sultan is obviously incredibly grateful. He probably would have given Avicenna gold, horses, a palace, whatever he wanted. But what does Avicenna actually ask for?
He asked for access to the royal library of the Samanids.
I love this detail so much. I saved your life, now just let me read your books.
It sounds almost quaint to us today because we have the internet.
Right.
We literally have the sum of human knowledge sitting in our pockets. But we have to heavily contextualize this. In the 10th century, books were incredibly rare. They were painstakingly hand-copied. A royal library wasn't just a collection of paper. It was a secure treasure vault of information that simply didn't exist anywhere else on Earth.
So this was basically like getting the master passwords to the mainframe.
Exactly. This was the golden ticket. By getting access to that specific library, Avicenna unlocked centuries of Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge that had been translated and stored away there. He describes walking into it and seeing rooms within rooms, chests stacked to the ceiling with manuscripts that no one had even looked at in years.
And he didn't waste any time once he got in?
No, he did not. He spent the next few years essentially uploading that entire library into his brain. He said later that by the time he was 18, he had completely exhausted the library. He had learned everything there was to learn in it.
I mean, that sounds a little arrogant.
It does sound arrogant, but in his specific case, it was also likely true. He had effectively reached the edge of human knowledge at age 18. This moment arguably launched his writing career. He already had the raw processing power in his brain, and suddenly he was given the ultimate data set to process.
So he hits the ceiling of what he can consume. Now, the only thing left to do is create. And the writer emerges. He starts writing at 21.
Which is incredibly young to be publishing authoritative works on logic, ethics, and metaphysics. And he's writing extensively in both Arabic and Persian.
Why does the language he chose to write in matter so much?
Because Arabic was the language of science, religion, and academia, very much like Latin was in Europe for a long time. If you wanted the elite scholars to read your work, you wrote in Arabic. But Persian was the vernacular, the language of the people, of culture, and of poetry. By writing in both, he was signaling that he could operate at the highest level in the ivory tower, but also right there on the ground level. He was entirely fluent in both worlds.
But his life wasn't just sitting quietly in a library writing, right? The source describes limitless travels. He was a wanderer.
Yes, the political situation in the region was highly volatile. The Samanid Empire, his initial patrons, eventually crumbled. New powers, like the Ghaznavids, were rapidly rising and taking territory. Avicenna often had to move just to stay safe or to find new patrons who would fund his work. He was effectively a high-profile political refugee at times, moving constantly from city to city.
That really adds a layer of intensity to his work. He's writing these monumental masterpieces while constantly looking over his shoulder.
Literally looking over his shoulder. There were times he had to flee cities in disguise just to avoid being captured or killed by rival political factions. But the source highlights a very specific chapter of his life that brought some relief. The Gorgan chapter.
Right, near the Caspian Sea.
Yes. He meets a friend in Gorgan who provides him with housing and a bit of a sanctuary. And this little bit of stability is absolutely crucial. It allowed him to stop running for a moment and start outputting massive amounts of work. He lectured pupils on logic and astronomy there.
And the source specifically notes that most of his well-known works, including the roots of the big one, the Canon of Medicine, were established during this relatively peaceful stay in Gorgan.
It really shows that even a profound genius needs a little bit of peace, quiet, and stability to get the real work done. You can gather data while traveling and running for your life, but you need a desk to write the masterpiece.
And speaking of masterpieces, let's dive into the Canon of Medicine, or Al-Qanun fi al-Tib. This is the big one. This isn't just a book he wrote. This is a monumental object in human history.
It is without a doubt his magnum opus, the Canon of Medicine. It sat on the desks of doctors in Europe and the Middle East for literally centuries. It was the standard textbook in European universities all the way until the 1600s. Think about that time frame, a book written in 1025 being used to formally teach doctors in 1650. That is a 600-year reign of absolute authority.
That is just insane to think about. Imagine a med student today using a biology textbook printed in the 1400s.
Exactly. It shows how definitive and unmatched it was. The source breaks the canon down into 5 distinct volumes, and the structure itself is just brilliant. It shows the sheer comprehensiveness and systematic nature of his mind.
Let's walk through those volumes because the structure really tells us how he thought about the human body. Books 1 and 2.
These cover physiology, pathology, and hygiene. This is the foundational knowledge. His logic was that before you can fix the machine, you have to fundamentally understand how the machine works in its natural state. He talks extensively about the 4 humors, which was the prevailing medical theory of the time, as well as anatomy, taking the pulse, and analyzing urine. And his concept of hygiene isn't just washing your hands. It's diet, sleep, exercise, and environmental factors. He was a massive proponent of preventative medicine.
So book 1 and 2 are basically how the body works and how to keep it working. Then book 3 and 4 shift gears.
Yes, these move directly into the practical application. Methods of treating diseases. Book 3 covers diseases that are specific to one single part of the body going from head to toe. So if you have a localized headache or an earache or specific liver pain, you look in Book 3. Book 4 covers systemic diseases issues that affect the whole body all at once, like severe fevers, poisons, and even cosmetic issues.
So he logically categorizes everything by local versus systemic. And finally, book 5, what's in there?
Pharmacology, the composition and precise preparation of remedies. He is painstakingly cataloging drugs, plants, minerals, how to mix them, what dosages to use, and what exact effects they have. It's a complete, enclosed system, from theoretical biology to diagnosis to treatment strategy to the actual compounding of the medicine.
The source also points out some specific insights within the canon that were just way, way ahead of their time. It mentions he gave detailed descriptions of contagious diseases and sexually transmitted diseases.
That is a massive conceptual leap for the era. The idea of contagion, that a disease can pass invisibly from person to person, wasn't at all obvious in a world before microscopes and germ theory. People mostly thought disease was just bad air, miasma, or an internal spiritual imbalance. For him to systematically observe that some diseases are directly transmissible requires incredible, rigorous observational skills. He was seeing invisible patterns in how sickness moved through a population.
He was basically predicting the foundation of germ theory without ever having seen a single germ.
In a very real way, yes. He suspected there were traces or elements in the air or water that transmitted these conditions.
So he's not just making lists of folk cures, he's analyzing the fundamental nature and behavior of illness itself.
Exactly. And the real expert takeaway here is about the logical flow of his work. Remember, he started his intellectual life as a master logician. He took the strict rules of logic and applied them to the very messy, unpredictable reality of the human body. He systematized medicine. Before him, medicine was often a chaotic list of folk remedies or disconnected anecdotal observations. He took that chaos and turned it into a rigid science with clear rules, categories, and predictable outcomes.
It's like he built the operating system that medicine ran on. He formatted the hard drive.
That is a very fair assessment. He organized the world's medical data so that generations of others could actually use it effectively.
But because one world-changing career wasn't enough for him, we have to talk about his later life. He wasn't just a doctor writing books in a quiet room. He was right in the thick of regional politics.
Yes, he spent the better part of his later life serving Muhammad ibn Rustam Dushmanziyar, who was the Kakuyid ruler at the time. And just look at his official titles. Physician, sure, but he was also the general literary advisor and the scientific advisor. He was essentially acting as the vizier. He was heavily involved in running the state administration.
And the source specifically says he accompanied the ruler on various campaigns. So he's actually out there in the field, in active war zones.
Yes. He wasn't hiding in an ivory tower at all. He was a highly action-oriented intellectual. He was out there on horseback, in the mud, dealing with complex troop logistics, military strategy, and treating the wounded soldiers firsthand.
It really refutes that modern idea that you have to be either a thinker or a doer. He was aggressively both. And somehow he kept writing through all of this. The source mentions a work called the Kitab al-Shifa, or the Book of Healing. But that's a slightly tricky title, isn't it?
It is a bit deceptive, yes. You hear Book of Healing from a famous doctor, and you naturally think, okay, this is more medicine. But the source clarifies that this is actually categorized under philosophy and science. It's not about healing the physical body. It's about healing the soul from the sickness of ignorance.
Oh, I really like that framing. Ignorance is the disease. Logic and philosophy are the cure.
Exactly. It is a massive philosophical encyclopedia. It deeply covers logic, physics, mathematics, and metaphysics. It was his attempt to explain the nature of existence itself.
And there was also the Kitab al-Najat, the Book of Deliverance, plus works on astrology, astronomy, and philology.
It just continually reinforces the polymath title we started this whole discussion with. To Avicenna, these weren't separate siloed subjects. Medicine, the movement of the stars, the structure of language, the rules of logic, it was all just different facets of one single universal truth. He was trying to understand the mind of God, essentially, through every available channel of human inquiry. He wanted the grand theory of everything.
It's incredibly ambitious.
It is the absolute definition of ambition.
But, like all stories, this one does have an ending. Which brings us to the final chapter of his life.
Avicenna died on June 21st in the year 1037. He was 56 years old.
56. I mean, that seems quite young, especially for someone who literally wrote the definitive book on human medicine and hygiene.
It is young by our standards, certainly, but he lived an incredibly hard, fast-paced life. Constant travel, intense political turmoil, being on the run, and just unending, rigorous intellectual work. He was widely known to burn the candle at both ends. He worked harder than anyone, and by some historical accounts, he played hard too. He eventually died in Hamadan, in the Kukud Emirate, suffering from a severe bout of colic. And that is exactly where his mausoleum stands today, in modern-day Iran.
But before he went, he left us with a final quote that really sticks with you. The source quotes him saying, "An ignorant doctor is the aide-de-camp of death."
The aide-de-camp of death, that is incredibly heavy.
Let's unpack that specific phrasing. An aide-de-camp is a strict military term. It means a direct assistant or secretary to a senior officer.
Right. He's saying that if you take on the mantle of a doctor and you don't actually know what you were doing, if you allow yourself to remain ignorant, you aren't just failing to help the patient, you are actively serving the enemy. You are practically working on the payroll of death itself.
That connects back so perfectly to everything we've discussed today. His absolute obsession with rigorous learning, his disdain for bad logical arguments from his teachers, his willingness to learn mathematics from the local grocer. For him, ignorance wasn't just a passive lack of knowledge, it was an active moral failing.
Especially when human lives are on the line. If you take on the sacred title of healer, you have a profound moral duty to know your stuff inside and out. You have a duty to be exceptionally competent. It's a harsh call to excellence, but one that resonates just as loudly today as it did 1,000 years ago.
Wow. Okay, so looking back on this whole historical journey, we started with a young boy in the village of Ashana, memorizing the entire Quran. We watched him outsmart his master teachers, learn advanced math from a grocer, cure a powerful sultan, consume an entire royal library, write the medical Bible for the entire world, and advise rulers on violent battlefields.
It truly is a testament to the upper limits of human potential. Avicenna shows us exactly what happens when astronomical intelligence meets boundless curiosity and unshakable discipline.
And that interdisciplinary part is really the key, I think. If he'd just stayed in the mosque studying religious law, or just stayed locked in the library, or just stayed in the hospital treating patients, he wouldn't have become Avicenna.
No, he wouldn't have. It was the synthesis of all those worlds. The arithmetic he learned from the grocer helped him structure his logic. The logic helped him systematically structure his medical theories. The medical success gave him the political access to the library. Everything connected and compounded.
So here is the big so what for you listening right now. We usually think of learning and careers as staying strictly in our lane. You're a marketing person, or you're an engineer, or you're an artist. But Avicenna proves that the massive breakthroughs come when you swerve entirely out of your lane.
Absolutely. The next big idea you need to solve your current problem probably isn't in the textbook you're supposed to be reading. It's somewhere else entirely. It's in the aisle of the grocery store, or in a random conversation with someone you wouldn't normally ever talk to.
And that leads me to the thought I want to leave everyone with today. We talked a lot about that grocer, the Indian grocer, who taught the greatest genius of an era how to do arithmetic. So think about your own life right now.
Who is your grocer?
Exactly. Who is the grocer you might be ignoring? Who is the person, or what is the random subject that you think is somehow below your pay grade or completely outside your professional field, but who actually holds the absolute key to the next big thing you need to learn?
That is the ultimate question, because that might be exactly where your own Indian arithmetic is hiding in plain sight.
Think deeply about that. Go find your grocer. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. We'll see you next time.
Take care.